Can you imagine a world ruled not by politicians and parliaments, but by poets, where the power of words conjures up dreams, and those dreams then become new political realities? From the time of the Napoleonic Wars, for half a century, Romantic nationalism swept Eastern Europe, and its key propagators were poets who became bards of the nation. The English Romantic poet Percy Shelley declared, "Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world." The German Johann Gottfried Herder, the British Lord Byron, Adam Mickiewicz of Poland and Lithuania, and Hungary's Sándor Petőfi. They proved to be movers and shakers, a label invented by the Irish poet Arthur O'Shaughnessy. In his poem Ode, O'Shaughnessy claimed that poets were the true authors of present reality. His poem announced that each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth, and that poets were the ones who did this powerful dreaming. In this lecture, we will see how they became the prophets of nationalism in Eastern Europe. Two themes we pursue in this course are Eastern Europe's connectedness to the outside world, and yet also its contrasts. The career of nationalism in Eastern Europe vividly shows both of these themes. Nationalism came later to Eastern Europe than to Western Europe, and then functioned in ways that were different. In Western Europe, the growth of centralizing monarchies in Spain, France, and Britain led to the formation of a sense of national identity within those units, linked to the state and the government. Indeed, in English, sometimes the words nation and state are used in a sloppy fashion as near synonyms. That's not correct. In Eastern Europe, in the realms of dynastic empires, national identity often came to be defined against the state, against the empire, in really rebellious ways, an insurrectionary nationalism on the part of so-called submerged nations. True nationhood rested with a people because they did not have a state yet. Moreover, if Western European national ideas dated back to the Renaissance era, in Eastern Europe they arrived later and made slow progress. Into the 20th century, many people in Eastern Europe did not see themselves primarily in national terms. Other identities seemed much more important. So again and again, if you ventured into Eastern Europe and asked a peasant who he was, he might answer, "Well, I'm from here." And if you kept pressing him on that question, he might tell you what religion he followed. The national question would not have made sense to many, and it only slowly grew in importance, as we will trace in these lectures. As late as the 1900s in Macedonia, when ethnic experts came to ask people there whether they considered themselves Greek or Bulgarian, they often got the reply, "What do you mean?" In that spirit, we should also ask at the outset, what is nationalism? It is a mentality, the sense that what has been called an imagined community of language, ancestry, history, custom, unites a people. This definition emphasizes not biology, but belief. A nation is a nation when people believe it to be one. Scholars have postulated a contrast between two kinds of nationalism, civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. Civic nationalism, based on political allegiance to a set of ideas, is seen as open, tolerant, and Western. Ethnic nationalism, based on lineage and biological origins, is said to be closed, intolerant, and associated with Eastern Europe. How does nationalism grow? The Czech historian Miroslav Hroch at the Charles University in Prague has proposed a very influential model of three phases in nation building. In phase A, a small group of activists, scholars, and poets investigate the language and the past of a people and call attention to these things so that these shared aspects of life would be acknowledged without yet making political demands. In phase B, an expanding group of enthusiasts work to expand the consciousness of nationalism to broader parts of the population, already proposing a vision of what the nation could become. In Phase C, this trend now becomes a full national movement, addressing the masses with different emphases and concepts for the future. First of all, it's necessary to introduce what I think of as perhaps the most important person in modern history that you have never heard of. This is the German writer Johann Gottfried Herder, the true originator of Romantic nationalism and cultural relativism, and the concepts of diversity and multiculturalism that are so frequently part of our vocabulary today. It's even been argued that Herder's impact on Eastern Europe is in fact greater than that of Karl Marx. So what is his impact? Herder was born in 1744 to a poor family in East Prussia along the Baltic Sea. His literary talents were recognized, and he went on to study at the great University of Königsberg under the philosopher Immanuel Kant. And he rose to become one of Germany's foremost thinkers, even appreciated by the great Goethe. As a young man, Herder took a post as a pastor in Riga, Latvia, in what was then the great port city of the Russian Empire, ruled by the Baltic German elite. As Herder worked there, he grew very interested in the folk songs and the customs of the surrounding non-German people in this region. On returning to Germany after his time in Eastern Europe, Herder published a selection of folk songs from different nations called Voices of the Peoples in 1778. In this collection and in his historical works, Herder promoted a new message about nationhood. Herder argued that each people, or folk, is different, and in its language, its uniqueness resides in folklore and in folk songs. So paradoxically, Herder was a nationalist, but an internationalist nationalist. He was convinced that there was a divine plan and that each people had been given a national mission. Herder argued that all of humanity is one, fundamentally, but it makes up a varied mosaic. He ringingly declared that the problem of being human had been solved in many different ways, with all human cultures worthy and all contributing to a providential evolution of humanity. Each people needed to develop its own culture freely in order to enrich mankind at large. So, being true to your own culture was a way of loving mankind. It followed from this for Herder that it was a crime to enslave or impose your culture on others, and he especially condemned the ways in which the Slavic peoples had been enslaved and abused by their neighbors, including the Germans. This famous Slav chapter in his history electrified several generations of Polish, Czech, and other Eastern European scholars, inspiring them. It's striking that while some German Enlightenment thinkers had been promoting concepts that denigrated Slavs, like the notion of Polish management, Herder, by contrast, was very positive. Herder's vision of nations cooperating with one another, unified in their pursuit of individual authenticity, and yet peaceful among themselves, was a truly potent one. Each ethnic group found intellectuals and historians to champion their cause and to invoke or mythologize their past golden age. It was only later that the potential conflicts and contradictions that could arise between these groups came more clearly into focus. This was a mood of romantic nationalism. Romanticism itself was a movement in the arts and politics that emphasized the power of the emotions over the rationality which the Enlightenment had celebrated. The key to Romanticism was a stress on authenticity and an often impatient reaching for the ideal, even impossible ideals, maybe in fact especially the impossible ones.